the water would enter here in the front, and it would pass between these meandering membranes. They're rather like a sort of loudspeaker diaphragm with a reducing, they narrowed towards the outside, and of course the whole thing rotated. So in the process the water was sucked in, it was then expelled towards the outside under centrifugal pressure, but at the same time as going towards the outside it was made to vorticate centripetally. And so the water that came out of the outlets was firstly extremely cold, because in the process there was an immense cooling, and again more or less the same effect took place behind the submarine as took place behind the trout. So moreover, because of the rotating thing, a suction was created in front of the machine, a pressure behind, and so the thing actually moved through the water. What in fact happened, or as far as one can determine what happened inside this nose cone, that's a bit more detail, is that there's a process of concentration, condensation, and then expansion, condensation and expansion. Now Viktor determined that there were two other forms of temperature. Normally the usual temperatures we think of rising and expanding heat, falling and concentrating cold. But he said there was also falling and concentrating heat and rising and expanding cold. Now those are the two temperature forms which are responsible in fact for life on this earth, because if you're outside in space, we have falling concentrating heat as you approach the Earth's surface, and rising and expanding cold as you go in the opposite direction. On the other hand, mostly with our technical systems we have rising heat, rising and expanding heat, and falling and concentrating cold, so that in technical controlled environments we usually have cold feet and a hot head. Whereas if we were able to turn this process around and have a natural system of temperature, then we'd have a cool head and warm feet. Now in this process of here, it was possible to cut out, to swap from falling and concentrating cold into rising and expanding cold, without cut out the heat element altogether. And so here in this machine you had falling and concentrating cold, because it was a centripetal vortical action from the outside inwards. Passing through there, then it would become the rising and expanding form of cold, so that in fact from here to there, going through this series of processes in other machines as well, Viktor was able to take, say, 20-degree water and cool it to 4 degrees in a matter of seconds, simply by pushing it through this system. Now the effect of this, of course, is because of the concentration, because of the condensation of water, or the densation of water, then there was always more room for more water to be sucked in at the other end. In fact, he spoke eventually of a process of creating the void, of causing such extreme densation that the elements, the physical substances, reverted to their energetic state, and they ceased to exist as occupying space in the physical world. That created even greater suction, and of course when they came out the other side, then the expansion was that much greater, so the whole thing moved through the water much faster. I hope this makes some sense. Then he turned also his, in 1948, he turned his mind to agriculture, because at the time, just after the war in Germany, food was a problem, and so he invented what was called the golden plough, or the bio plough, which had a different form, because he felt that from his understanding that the ploughs which were used in those days, or the conventional plough, actually sheared the capillaries in the soil, which were the sources through which nutrients were supplied from the groundwater through upwards to the roots of the plants, and they cut them off. Also, because they were made of metal, then certain electrolytic currents were generated in the soil, which partially decomposed the water molecule and disturbed the nutrients in the soil. And so he invented this plough, which was actually, I think, copper, phosphor bronze. This was a much later model. And the idea of this one was to slice through the earth. And because it was made of copper, of course, it didn't create any of these electrolytic currents. And in a field outside Salzburg, where he did several trials, the field was ploughed in strips with a copper plough, steel plough, copper plough, steel plough, and so on. And when finally the crop grew up, it was found that there was a difference in height of maybe 6-9 inches between the iron and the copper. And as he achieved most remarkable yields, increases in yields of up to maybe 40% in some cases. This just shows an ear of rye with 104 grains on it. That was the sort of length he was getting with these things. A potato which weighed 430 grams, so that would be about a pound, I suppose, with 20 eyes in it. But that was very high quality produce, so there was no need for sprays or anything. And so it was quite telling that just by changing your steel or sheeting your steel plough with copper or phosphor bronze, which is better because it resists rubbing and it doesn't deteriorate so quickly as copper, not as soft, then you can achieve huge increases in fertility. And another aspect to do with the ploughing, instead of ploughing it in straight lines, which is normally done, it was very important to understand the orientation of the ploughing, so that fundamentally the furrows went north-south, so that when the sun moved across the heavens, one side, the whole plant firstly got an alternation in light and shadow, so did the soil. But by introducing the curves in it, then even this pattern of light and shade and exposure to the sun was even more reduced, so that there was a far better balance of light and shade, and therefore the moisture was conserved in the soil. He also had other ideas about composting. He was very fond of egg shapes, and we'll find out maybe a little bit more about those. This was the egg-shaped compost system, and he had again a completely different view of how these should be done. Normally when we compost and the temperatures start to build up in the compost heap, we think, oh well, now it's cooking, it's going to be good. But he said this temperature is very bad, because in order to increase fertility, not just to maintain it, you have to have a cold fermentation process. That means that you've got to keep the heat down as far as possible, because if you keep the heat down, then earthworms will migrate into the compost heap much earlier on. They will work the soil inside it, and when they finally die out, then their bodies, which are full of protein, will have enriched your compost heap all that much more. But if you have allowed the compost heap to heat up, then the worms will not come in at all. By putting it under the tree like this, then the compost not only fertilized the tree, it was built up in layers of gravel and dry vegetable matter, not damp vegetable matter, because the idea was to keep water out of it as far as possible. And there were newspapers wrapped around the trunk of the tree, which finally rotted out, allowing a passage of air to come right down and aerate the whole system. And the outside of it was covered with clay, so that as far as possible rainwater would not penetrate into it, because rainwater, being virtually pure water, seeks after all the elements it can get, and then it would actually remove minerals and trace elements from the compost heap, which means that they would not then be available for whatever you wanted to grow with it. And so it was protected under the tree within the drip line, so that it and eventually in the end of autumn or early winter you would break it down and put it over the field.